I mean, it's Dungeons and Dragons, right? What's more iconic than an ancient wingy lizard? They're some of the most powerful foes you'll ever face in a campaign. Basically a force of nature in their own right. But unlike a lot of monsters, they're probably as smart, if not smarter, and wiser than the party of puny mortals who would deign to cause them problems. And there are so many varieties, and so many dragons already established in the Forgotten Realms canon. It's a veritable dragon buffet out there. So I'm going to tell you about a few standout dragon personalities that you could easily incorporate into your campaigns. These are all Forgotten Realms dragons, but, I mean, the archetypes are the archetypes. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our first contestant. I can't help it, I love this one. Our hostess with the mostest, the illustrious Iryklathagra. She's an ancient great worm blue dragon that's been moving and shaking in the realms of Tethir, and Kalimshan since long before they existed in modern forms. She's a shrewd businesswoman with a nose for a good deal and an eye for the long game. She has both a brand in the marketing sense and a staggering amount of political acumen. And for a dragon, she's managed to shake off one of the biggest and most self-destructive flaws of her kind: pride. She's not exactly humble per se, but she has a sober perspective on her own capabilities. She knows when to fold them, and she's not above asking politely for what she wants when any other dragon would belligerently charge in. When she gives her word, she keeps it, and if you're in her confidence, she'll treat you right. Though her hoard is perhaps the most impressive in all the realms, rivaling the wealth of nations, her lair is basically impossible to access. The only known entrance to the lair is a mid-air invisible portal between two peaks in the small teeth that deposits anyone passing through it into an endless well, really a vertical tube with a portal at the bottom that leads to the top of the shaft and activates one round after someone slams into the bottom of the shaft. Guarded by a pair of endlessly warring genies, an advanced 25 HD Ifriti and an advanced 25 HD Noble Genie. The exact location of this portal is difficult to discern, as anyone passing through it triggers the creation of an illusion of his or her form that appears to continue on in mid-flight. So yeah, good luck getting past the infinite falling double portal with eternally fighting genies inside. If you do fight your way past the layers upon layers of security and unfair traps to the heart of Iryklathagra's lair, you will find a blue dragon sitting on Iryklathagra's hoard. That's Iryklathagra, right? Slay her and we're done? No, that's actually her daughter, Daurgothoth, but she makes for a perfect decoy. Iryklathagra and Daurgothoth have something that few chromatic dragons share. They have a close, genuinely loving relationship, and Iryklathagra pays her daughter handsomely for the service of sitting on her hoard all day. It's an arrangement they're both very happy with. She does love a win-win deal. In the unlikely event that Dragon Slayers did get to her daughter, Iryklathagra would probably have her raised and then come down on her assailants with the burning fury of 1,000 suns. Iryklathagra is perfectly positioned to hear about that if it does happen, because she spends a lot of time in human guise, mingling with the noble courts of local human kingdoms, all of which were paying her regular tribute as of 3rd edition. Her story stretches all the way back in ancient history to the Shun dynasty that ruled the region in which Kalimshan, and Tethir are now, and whose emperor double-crossed her repeatedly. She was basically the dynasty's mortal nemesis, and she ended up with the nickname Sharp Fangs after she bit Emperor Shun VII's arm and leg off. You can go watch my Shun video if you want to hear that complete history. Long story short, his daughter and successor Shani, though an infamously ineffective ruler that the word Shani became Alzito slang for a leader with no ability to lead, managed to finally make peace with Iryklathagra. They agreed that the inheritor of Kalim's throne would make tribute to the dragon every 100 years. In exchange, she'd leave the lands alone. The Sil Pashas of Kalimshan, as of 3rd edition, were the inheritors of Kalim's throne. So they carried on paying the centennial tithe for fear of what would happen if they didn't, but basically every Sil Pasha publicly bemoaned having to do so. On the other hand, sings a very different tune. Am's Council of Six diverts a percentage of the nation's tax revenue into Iryklathagra's claws every year in an arrangement dating back to the dragon's quiet financial backing of Thay's Selimchant and the nascent Council of Six in the year of the Striking Falcon, 1333 DR, during the Great Omnian Trade War. A previous arrangement with the Kings of existed before the fall of the monarchy in the year of the Crumbling Keep, 1276 DR. The government of loves having an ancient dragon on retainer. She's basically a ground floor investor in their government who did them many a good turn back when they were first consolidating power in the wake of the monarchy's collapse. The fact that she keeps getting a cut gives her a vested interest in keeping things running nice and smoothly. She protects from other dragons as if it were her territory, but doesn't hunt there. And a nice predictable percentage to an amiable dragon with great customer service is so much better than the alternative. 5 stars, would dragon again. Tethir has a third, separate arrangement. When the Shun dynasty fell at the hands of the vengeful one-armed prince turned King Strom, the first of Tethir, his army set the imperial city of Shunak to the torch, a legendary act of arson known as the Great Fires of Shunak, in which every surviving member of the royal family and most of the imperial bureaucracy perished. The flames danced for 20 days and nights, but after 4 days, King Strom received a visitor in the form of a polite blue dragon. It was Iryklathagra, here to inform the Little Elf King, as she called him, that many treasures in the possession of Shun had originally been stolen from her. She asked if he'd be alright to go retrieve some of her stuff from the fire, because again, Iryklathagra would rather ask than take. The Little Elf King agreed, so long as she swore never to use Tethir as a hunting ground. She did, and she's kept her promise ever since. So Tethir's protection deal is basically free, but she's such a good bargainer that most monarchs of Tethir paid tribute anyway. It'd be a shame if something happened because they didn't. In Tethir's case, the fall of the monarchy during the 10 Black Days of Elent ended centuries of quiet tribute by Tethir's royal house. Agents of Sharpfangs are now quietly negotiating with King Haedrak and Queen Zaranda on resumption of such tribute, with the wreckage inflicted on Kalimport's palace ward serving as a useful warning of the consequences if no agreement is reached. Iryklathagra is also a prolific employer. She hires bards to travel the breadth of her territory to sing about her stories, her good character, and the brutality of her retaliation against anyone who thinks they can get one over on her, the way she wants her stories told. In other words, she's conscious of the fact that she has a brand, and the way her actions affect that brand. In addition to bards, she's got a whole score of negotiators and emissaries on her payroll, working the angles with regional governments. She doesn't really care about the politics beyond its implication for her horde, but she has her claws in many pies. So this is her style. Influencing nations from the sidelines, sealing mutually beneficial deals, keeping other dragons off her and their turf, and getting paid. So in terms of incorporating her into your game, she's best suited for political intrigue campaigns set in and around the nations of the Shining South. Tethir, Kalimshan. There have been some major changes in those nations since 3rd edition, and we basically haven't heard anything about Iryklathagra since, or where she stands. So let's consider. Council of 6 became the Council of 5 in 4th edition, with the elimination of the seat of Daharanak in the late 14th or early 15th centuries DR. But the goal and methods haven't really changed. It's a good bet that they're still quietly giving a cut of their treasure to their favorite investor. Tethir has changed quite a bit through the years, but it's not unlikely that Iryklathagra was successful in winning Zaranda Star's dynasty over. Their current queen, as of the year of the Black Regalia, 1498 DR, is Isabel Linden, and there's a whole bunch of incredible intrigue surrounding her early life as told by the novel The Fanged Crown by Jenna Helland. Spoiler, she's not actually who she says she is. It's very easy to imagine Isabel and Iryklathagra finding each other surprisingly delightful company or becoming each other's worst enemy, but they definitely have an opinion on one another. Meanwhile, Kalimshan has changed the most, having gone through multiple revolts, civil wars, and natural disasters before finally transforming into a wealthy, steampunk paradise full of robots and flying cars. It's not clear whether the extremely goody two-shoes Sultana Songal, who wrested Kalimshan from the grip of the Twisted Rune, intends to continue with the Centennial Tithe, or even whether doing so would or would not be the right decision. But that, too, is great fodder for a campaign. Your PCs are most likely to come into contact with Iryklathagra without knowing it, in the form of a beautiful courtier that's really her in disguise, or with one of her agents that she's placed all over the region. She's usually pretty direct about what she wants. She has a lot of options in terms of being open or covert. She's charismatic, and she's always looking to make a good deal. She's a lot like a devil in that respect. She's got a lot of leverage, but she wants people to think she's sleeping away on her hoard, content with her riches, when really she's standing in the same room, pulling the strings behind the curtain. You can have a lot of fun with this very political, very capitalist dragon, but don't mistake her polite demeanor for weakness or benevolence. She enjoys eating the children of other dragons while they're still alive. She's Sharpfangs for a reason, and the strength of her bite is legendary. And as a spellcasting Great Worm with one of Toriel's greatest panoplies of magic items, she's probably a lot stronger even than a CR23 Ancient Blue Dragon stat block from the 5th edition Monster Manual. A boss fight against her would be the epic climax of a high-level campaign. But ultimately, Iryklathagra is much more fun as a looming social and political threat. Plus, there's a serious discussion to be had about whether getting rid of her would even be desirable or heroic. In her absence, enterprising chromatic dragons would be free to wreak havoc across the region, raiding and devouring helpless villages, travelers, and supply caravans, and demanding their own tribute in turn. Her beloved daughter would weep. Om's rulers, too, would mourn her passing, and many very dangerous artifacts from her hoard would be at risk of ending up in the wrong hands. So you get to ask your players the delicious question: is it worth it? Raulothim, the Silent Shadow, is an emerald dragon who resides on the Isle of Axard, which is part of the Raulothim archipelago. He lairs inside an extinct volcano called Zardmount in the great caldera known as the Pit of Stars. If you were to descend into the pit, you'd see his hoard hidden in plain sight in the middle of the bottom, a pile of gold next to a collection of treasure chests. But what was once the lair of a beholder is now the lair of the invisible ghost of that beholder, something known as a doom sphere, which Raulothim keeps around as an incredibly powerful defense against intruders. Raulothim himself, if he's there, is probably hanging out on one of his perches on the side of the pit. Once the Doomsphere has laid waste to intruders, he magically levitates their corpses out of the Doomsphere's reach for examination. Emerald dragons are a curious sort. Inquisitive and studious, they tend to be the kind of dragons who prefer knowledge to wealth. They're also naturally quite reclusive, making even the casual acquaintance of the average emerald dragon a challenge in and of itself. Raulothim takes all these tendencies to the extreme and ludicrous. He is excessively paranoid, socially anxious to the nth degree, and desperately lonely. He lives his life in fear of missing out, but he can barely work up the courage to speak to people he knows well. If he's ever approached, he just flies away. Hence, the Silent Shadow. The events that made Raulothim so thoughtful began with his chance encounter with a ship that sailed the skies. The ship's spelljamming crew were seeking to hide their treasure on the uninhabited outer islets of Raulothim. When they found their treasure-burying efforts watched over by a silent, attentive emerald dragon of monstrous size, some of that crew fled through a portal they opened into another plane. Those sights shattered what the Silent Shadow thought he knew of the world. Frankly, it scared him. How many hidden realms and folks watching Toriel from them are there? Who are these watchers and what are their aims? How many mages who can open such portals serve masters on these hidden worlds? Can these wizards call in magical aid from their hidden masters? Did the ship's crew guess at his own innocence, or do they consider him an agent working with a rival of theirs? Pondering such questions, Raulothim sits and broods, mastering all the magic he can. Thus, Raulothim silently waits for the day someone who thinks he knows too much of such a thing seeks to slay him. Raulothim's anxiety about the places that may exist beyond Toriel has basically inspired him to obsess about defending against these unknown menaces. But his shyness makes that difficult. There's one family of halflings that Raulothim trades with, the Tercer family of Holgerstead. He acquires minor magical items and supplies from them in exchange for excruciatingly detailed and accurate maps of the northern Swords Coast, which he carves in stone. The Tercers sell them onwards as drawn by a dragon, and they can fetch a pretty penny from wealthy aristocrats. Raulothim's ambition is basically to create Gatewatch from Magic the Gathering. Raulothim knows of several Baelnorn who watch over portals near the sanctums they guard, and wonders if he can bargain with such beings to have them monitor a far-scrying network of Gatewatch magics. He deems such a watch urgently necessary. His own fleeting and sporadic examinations of portals have shown the Worm of Axard heavily armed creatures of many strange races furtively emerging from and disappearing into these portals to other worlds. Raulothim worries that Toriel may already be a place of arms storage and weapons practice for creatures from elsewhere, and that an unguarded Faerun may someday, without warning, become a wasted battleground between warring forces from elsewhere. Someday all too soon. He wants to recruit adventuring parties to help him out with this, but again, this is the world's most socially anxious dragon, so he watches them from afar and thinks yearningly about how cool it would be if he hired them, and if they were cool with him too. He's currently engaged in using crystal balls, some having powers of detect thoughts or clairaudience, to spy on active adventuring bands so he can learn their true natures. Raulothim believes he needs to find adventurers capable and formidable in both intrigue and combat, who above all will be loyal to him. He'll sponsor them, and if needs be, aid them with magic and his own fighting abilities, as they carry out a task that is likely to consume their lives, exploring the portals Raulothim has heard about, finding and guarding any such portals near his lair, and devising some method of watching over all known gates for invasions by potentially deadly foes. By the time of late 5th edition, he's managed to get over himself for long enough to reach out to a few of them, but his paranoia sometimes gets the better of him. Once someone knows of his existence, they're a potential threat after all. Raulothim's drive to amass magic and his innate mistrust of anyone powerful enough to potentially threaten him make the dragon a dangerous adversary. However, he knows the surest way of safeguarding Faerun against planar invaders is to keep a careful watch on all planar portals, and that to do so he must rely on allies. Raulothim is therefore open to negotiating with adventurers willing to aid in that task, but only those he's sure he can trust. On more than one occasion, doubt has gnawed at Raulothim's mind, prompting him to preemptively strike against a previously trusted ally. He's also, by this time, developed an infamous spell of his own, Raulothim's Psychic Lance, which is a 4th level enchantment spell with a range of 120 feet, and which you can use even on targets you can't physically see if you happen to know their name. If the target fails the intelligence save, they're subjected to a pretty potent psychic blast, and also fully incapacitated until your next turn. Your players might come into contact with Raulothim either as a potential recruit to his Gatewatch initiative, or by being deliberately placed on a collision course with him by one of the Chosen of Mystra, either directly or indirectly. Your players may find out about a horde of magical items without knowing exactly what they're getting into, because Mystra wants this shy lizard gone. Whether this dragon perishes under the attacks of treasure seekers, or the portal-hopping overfoes he so fears, is anyone's guess. But if neither prevail over Raulothim in the next 2 decades, Elminster expects the Emerald Dragon to find a magical means of creating a stasis clone, or otherwise prolonging his existence, such as lichdom. Though the old mage seems to admire the Silent Shadow's striving, Mystra's desire to have magic abroad in Faerun rather than hoarded keeps her chosen busy spreading rumors and treasure maps that bid fair to keep the Worm of Axard battling treasure seekers often, until the day Raulothim is no more. The joke's on Mystra, though, since Raulothim has canonically survived over a century since the current year of 2nd edition when this quote was published. According to Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, he's still kicking around the Pit of Stars, so if you're meeting him in a campaign, he's probably older and wiser than he was in the Worms of the North article, and he probably has clone-based contingency plans in place now. In combat, he's basically surrounded by a swarm of wands and staves, which he's developed the means to have fly around and trigger independently, so he's basically a master of drone warfare. And visually, he keeps a lot of his possessions on his person in various pouches and backpacks. He's sort of a less naked dragon than most. Raulothim makes extensive use of a spell that enables him to animate wands to float and fire at his command, that is, hang in midair, aim, and discharge remotely. He uses the Staff of Power and a few wands to so guard his lair, and he carries other wands with him in a knapsack for use in any duel he may have to fight, usually setting them to float and fire at a foe from one direction while he attacks from another. The Worm of Axard always wears a ring, or rather, always wears a plain brass ring. Some sages believe he possesses and alternates several magical rings. If your campaign involves something threatening Faerun, especially if that something is extraplanar in nature, there's a chance Raulothim might be the first one to know about it, which makes him a great NPC to set players on a grand, overarching quest to save the world and to deliver some exposition about it. That is, if he can overcome his shyness. Miirym the Sentinel Worm, as she is now, is a bit of a tragic figure, though she does have her own magic card. She's a unique kind of ghost, namely the ghost of a silver dragon that was once bound to the Library of Candlekeep by the legendary Archmage Torth, as a punishment for breaking into the place in search of treasure for her hoard. The sorcerer had intended to keep her bound for 20 years, but he was one of the greatest sorcerers the world had ever seen. After 15 years, he passed away, and no one else could undo the binding. She remained trapped in servitude as Candlekeep's guardian. Her frustration at her plight she took out on intruders, slaying them with merciless brutality. She's one of the reasons Candlekeep has a reputation it has for being somewhere you don't mess with. But even a dragon cannot stand vigil forever. He was mortally wounded by a marauding band of wizards centuries after she'd been bound, in the year of the Shield Tree, 1181 DR. But it took a whole year for her wounds to finally claim her life. Thing is, Torth's magic was so strong that even as her flesh sloughed away and her bones crumbled to dust, she found herself bound to his service even still. The effect this had on her mind was significant, and these days she's not exactly all there. The monks of Candlekeep at first attempted to destroy her, but they couldn't. Instead, they sacrificed a succession of volunteers, moving Torth's casket deeper down into the tunnels and caverns beneath Candlekeep, where she remains bound even now. Even the monks are reluctant to go down there. Miirym, when she appears, usually does so as a pair of spectral jaws hunting around amongst the stacks. She'll watch passersby for a long while, imperceptibly. Curious, but also waiting for them to break a rule so she can snuff them out. She is, however, as you might imagine, crushingly lonely. Talking your way out of a fight with Miirym is a definite possibility. She doesn't see a lot of conversation, so she's starved for it. And she absolutely adores the color green, as it reminds her of life and light and the landscapes she used to fly over before her imprisonment. Adventurers with ties to Candlekeep may know of Miirym, especially if they had any reason to delve down deeper into the reaches of its archives, and a very easy way to run this dragon as a threat is to position whatever it is the players are looking for down in her domain. Candlekeep is a magical place, after all. Any manner of relics could be found in these tunnels, or the answer to practically any question you might want to ask. But if she spots you carrying a book or a piece of written text, including your own spellbook, she'll demand you return it, because all writing in her deteriorating mind belongs to Candlekeep. If intruders who come within Miirym's reach are openly carrying books of any kind, such as their own spellbooks, or reveal such items to her at any time, the Sentinel Worm insists they be surrendered to her for rightful return to Candlekeep. She won't believe any protests as to the ownership of the tomes. As far as she's concerned, writings of any sort belong to Candlekeep, period. She has one further grisly warning to share with intruders. In a dead-end passage, a skeletal head and shoulders float in midair, arms frozen forever raised in a futile warding-off gesture, jaws stretched wide in an endless scream. The rest of the skeleton has long since crumbled away. This much remains due to the failing magics of a plain electrum carcanet still encircling the bony neck. Its magics fail entirely if it is disturbed, allowing both it and the remaining bones to crumble into dust. In any case, its power long ago rendered the bones inert to scrying and necromantic magics. Nothing of the identity or intentions of the remains can now be learned. Miirym willingly supplies all she knows. This was once a beautiful and imperious sorcerer who tried to bargain with the Sentinel Worm, offering to surrender a book she'd seized if she were allowed to copy certain writings out of it unmolested. When the dragon told her both the tome and the new writings would have to be returned to the keep, the mage hurled a meteor swarm at Miirym, but she had the misfortune to do so in a section of passage where an earlier intruder had left a glass guardian, so she felt its full effects herself. Several of these items still survive elsewhere in the passages roamed by the Sentinel Worm. Staggering and near death, she retreated to where her remains now float and cast her last powerful spell at Miirym as the floating jaws approached her in slow silence. It was imprisonment, and it had no effect on the Sentinel Worm because of her spell resistance. The sorceress gave in to despair, but refused to surrender the book when Miirym asked her one last time. So the Sentinel Worm ate both of her legs. The carcanet held the mage upright as she bled to death. She's also desperate to hear the news of the outside world, even though it makes her sad, because she can never again be part of it, and she wants nothing more than to fly free in the skies once more, but she's been falsely promised release so many times that she's entirely given up hope and sunken into bitter cynicism. She's still down to talk about her dreams, though, or just to talk to someone in general. She doesn't really want to fight. Please, just talk for a few minutes. It's so quiet down here. Arveiaturace is an ancient white dragon that lairs atop the Ragged Glacier in the Frozen Far region in the furthest north of the Sword's Coast. She's smarter than your average white dragon, a type generally known for their brutish and straightforward behavior, and this is probably because of her long history with the now-deceased wizard Melthorond, who was her master, friend, and sole confidant for a long, long time. Melthorond's decomposed skeleton still rides atop her back, held in place by magics he employed to keep himself in the saddle. She still talks to him like he's alive, and so can often be heard having one-sided conversations with the master she misses if you happen to get near enough that she hasn't noticed you. Which has gotten easier as her sight has deteriorated in her advanced age, cataracts reducing her vision to 60 feet, though her other senses are as fine-tuned as ever. With the passing of her wizard master, she's become rather lonely, and she's taken to rescuing shipwreck survivors to keep her company. She generally won't harm these captives unless they try to attack or steal from her, though if they ever admit they're also feeling lonely, she'll drop everything to carry them to wherever in Faerun they want to be. She's got a reputation, however, for wrecking ships herself. She regularly grabs sailors off the deck purely as a tasty snack, and her attacks can be so vicious that the ship is torn completely to shreds. In the waters off the Swords Coast, particularly in the north, the sight of her inspires stark raving terror. She attacks so regularly that the white worm came calling has become a euphemism in nautical slang for perishing at sea. So, she's complicated, you know? Sensitive and lonely, but also a menace who really enjoys losing all sense of control and just going on a horrible apeshit widow-making rampage. Her former lair in the Ice Peak was connected to Meltheron's Wizard Tower, and she's been careful to collect some of his things to place in her new home. Her long history with Meltheron has made Arveiaturace very comfortable with the idea of combating spellcasters, and magic holds no particular fear for her, though she isn't a caster herself. She leaves that to her beloved wizard rider, and might futilely try to encourage him to contribute to a battle. She loves Meltheron so dearly, in fact, that once upon a time she heard of a scholar of Candlekeep who had written a disparaging text about her beloved. So she flew all the way there to tear off the library's entire roof looking for him so she could set the record straight about her late master. She soon after received a tome from Candlekeep titled The High History of the Mighty Mage Meltheron, which had much nicer things to say about him. You could theoretically run into Arveiaturace anywhere along the Swords Coast, especially out at sea. You can encounter her in several published adventures for 5th edition because it seems Wizards of the Coast love using her. She's a minor plot point in Rise of Tiamat, which we know from Baldur's Gate 3 is the adventure Will went on. It reveals she has a boyfriend who is exasperatingly waiting for her to get over the whole Meltheron thing. Fun fact, their son, who is also a white dragon, turns up and then dies in the R.A. Salvatore novel Rise of the King. Arothator's iceberg lair serves primarily as a meeting ground for him and his mate, the ancient white dragon Arveiaturace, the White Worm. She is aware of the cult's activity, but has been reluctant to join forces with it, and Arothator seeks a way to gain her commitment. At one time, Arveiaturace served a wizard named Meltheron, whose corpse remains strapped to a saddle on the dragon's back. He has never accepted his death and still speaks to him as if he were alive. Arothator hopes that if he provides Arveiaturace with a new wizard to serve, she'll recover from her grief and join him in wholeheartedly supporting the cult of the dragon. When the proud, ambitious Macath the Crimson arrived in Arothator's lair, the dragon enticed her with the prospect of becoming Arveiaturace's master and rider. Arveiaturace then turns up in Storm King's Thunder as a rare random encounter in the Savage Frontier chapter. Arveiaturace, better known to Northfolk as Iceclaws, claims Icewind Dale is part of her domain. The characters catch sight of her in the sky overhead. Rarely does she condescend to meddle in the affairs of land dwellers. However, if one or more characters neglect to take cover, she swoops down for a closer look at them, and they at her. The dragon is quite insane, and she wears a saddle to which is strapped the dead, withered corpse of a wizard she once regarded as a great friend. Arveiaturace occasionally calls out to the corpse in Draconic, as though the wizard were still alive. The dragon isn't hungry or spoiling for a fight, but if one or more of the characters refuse to cower before her, Arveiaturace might strafe them once with her breath weapon, or try to snatch up one of them with her claws, grappling the victim instead of dealing damage on a hit, only to drop the poor fool from a perilous height several rounds later. And then finally, she turns up in Rime of the Frostmaiden as both a random encounter in the wilderness of Icewind Dale, and also as a specific encounter if the players explore a derelict ship, where the White Dragon has placed some of her hoard. At CR20, she's the sort of encounter you're not really supposed to fight. It's very possible for a player character to have a personal history with Arveiaturace if you're looking for connections. Maybe they were on a ship that got attacked by her, or perhaps they were once rescued from a shipwreck by her and spirited away to her lair for some conversation. Or perhaps the White Worm came calling for one of their loved ones at sea. Equally, she's a menace that a lot of people would want to be dealt with, personally. Arveiaturace tends to be a bit of a force of nature. She's a little off-putting, a little off-kilter. She's as likely to chomp down on you as she is to ask for a moment of your time. If you do encounter her, though, don't forget to pay your respect to Meltheron. He's very cool, even if he doesn't talk much these days. Maybe he's just thinking about something important. Yeah, definitely.
Stacy's dad has got me down bad. He's all I want, and I think he's a real Chad.
And finally, one of the most infamous yet unknown dragons on Toril, Daurgothoth, the Creeping Doom, is the realm's most fearsome Dracolich, and sort of Mistra's favorite prince. If you're a talented enough singer, you might even have met him, and not known it. Daurgothoth has a cruel sense of humor and enjoys anticipating tactics ahead in any struggle. He craves music and company from time to time, but he has never let these needs compromise the security of his lair. Beautiful lady bards who acquire mysterious lone male human audiences at their campfires in the north are warned that they could be entertaining simple travelers, lycanthropes or doppelgangers, harpers, or the creeping doom. Daurgothoth seldom bothers or devours good singers. Daurgothoth is so unfathomably powerful that he doesn't really have a canonical stat block outside of a web supplement that now only exists on archive.org, though his challenge rating was listed in 3rd edition as 50, which is about as high as challenge rating goes without cracking open the epic level handbook. Even then, only epic dragons and the Hecatoncheires come even close, and Hecatoncheires are basically divine ICBMs deployed by one powerful divine pantheon to obliterate another. Creatures that can not only take on a god and win, but can also cleave through them by the dozen like a divine wood chipper. And they're only CR 57. Daurgothoth is so powerful, he's not just basically a god, he's probably actively refusing to return Ao's calls. Chazar, the demigod chosen of Tiamat and ruler of Chesenta, was only CR 40. To Daurgothoth, actual literal godhood simply isn't enough. A divine portfolio and accountability to Ao? More trouble than it's worth. Daurgothoth wants more than divinity could ever give him, and to escape the tedious chaos of the spell plague, he created a demi-plane with its own weave independent of that of Mystra, where he could
have a nice cold pint and wait for all this to blow over.
The roster of entities that have attempted to spin up their own alternative weaves of magic is a small and exclusive club that includes Corellon, the god of elven high magic, Shar, creator of the Shadow Weave, and Lolth, creator of the Demon Weave. But while the Shadow Weave and the Demon Weave were both pale, imperfect reflections of the True Weave, parasitically dependent upon it for their own stability, one can surmise that Daurgothoth's private weave really did have the juice. It sustained the Dracolich in his own pocket dimension, even in the absence of a Mistran weave torn apart by her assassination and the spread of the spell plague. So what does Daurgothoth want? Daurgothoth was, once upon a time, an ancient black dragon. He bore a distinctive gouge on his left flank from a wound that had been almost fatal. But he did survive, and he saw an opportunity in the form of the Cult of the Dragon, the cult founded by the rogue chosen of Mystra, Samaster. It developed a means to turn dragons into Dracoliches in order to fulfill a prophecy that may or may not have been mistranslated. Daurgothoth liked the idea of becoming a powerful undead free from the constraints of his physical form, so he approached the high-ranking cult mage Hulakarn and expressed his interest in joining the cult. Trouble was, whenever the Cult of the Dragon created a Dracolich, they also wove enchantments into the ritual that would allow them to control the creatures, just in case the applicants weren't as loyal to the cult as they'd claimed to be. Daurgothoth, an astute student of the art even then, noticed these safeguards. Once the transformation was complete, he turned on Hulakarn, slay him, and broke his magical bonds. Before he disappeared into obscurity, the cult wizard Onalibar came after him in a desperate attempt to regain control over the newborn Dracolich. Daurgothoth ate him, but still to this day uses the name Onalibar as an alias. It's an in-joke that no one but him would get, but that's his sense of humor. Daurgothoth set himself up in a lair in an abandoned gnome city of Dulblund, northeast of Waterdeep. It neighbors the lowest reaches of the Undermountain and the warrens of Maiden's Tomb Tor, which gives him convenient access to the city of Waterdeep. There's also a flooded tunnel connecting the complex to the bottom of the River Desserin, and he's been slowly excavating with magic in a northwesterly direction. He had intended to eventually carve an egress somewhere in presumably the Sword Mountains. From his lair, he began to meddle very cautiously in the affairs of the Sword Coast, but those who cross paths with him don't realize they're dealing with a dragon at all. The Creeping Doom instead masquerades as a crime boss, presenting a face that is often assumed to be a reclusive Waterdavian nobleman. His spells allow him to speak with underlings by means of projected, human-seeming images and to spy upon them from afar. When doing so, Daurgothoth customarily poses as some sort of renegade, deliberately mysterious wizard. In such roles, this Dracolich has begun to play an increasingly active role in the shadier businesses of the cities of Waterdeep, Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter, and Secomber. At first, he pursued the acquisition of spells, magic items, and substances that might serve as magic components, but this drew the attention of too many alarmed spellcasters and authorities, one of whom dubbed the unknown cause of the thefts the Creeping Doom, a title Daurgothoth gleefully adopted. So he has taken to cloaking his activities behind a web of often unwitting thieving bands and sharp-dealing gray market merchants. In the year of Rogue Dragons 1373 DR, Samaster managed to usurp the ancient elf's Dracorage mythal and link it to his phylactery, creating a permanent Dracorage across the Forgotten Realms. He was stopped and slain, of course, by an unlikely alliance of heroes, and of course that wasn't the last we'll see of Samaster, because somehow Samaster returned is sort of his entire thing. In the power vacuum created by Samaster's absence, though, Daurgothoth managed to wrest control of the cult itself by forging an uneasy alliance with the Shadow Dracolich fanatic Oglaroasa, the Sibilant Shade, and the Bane Lich Algashon Nether, who was the one who seduced Samaster to evil in the first place and has always had a bit of back-and-forth relationship with the guy. Oglaroasa was named First Whisperer, Daurgothoth First Reader, and Algashon First Interpreter. From his lair in the ruined gnome city of Dolblund near the banks of the River Desserin, the First Reader studies arcane lore recovered by the Dragon Cult, including eldritch texts removed from the catacombs beneath the Monastery of the Yellow Rose. Daurgothoth creates new spells and magic items for use by the keepers of the Secret Horde. The First Reader is not associated with any specific Dragon Cult cell, and he forcibly expels any follower of the Scaly Way who dares to come calling. So again, what does Daurgothoth want? On the one hand, he desires power. Duh, he's a Dracolich. He wants to be the most powerful being in all of existence. The world is not enough. But that's a very generic dragon motivation. What Daurgothoth specifically wants is children of his own. He's motivated by a dream of parenthood, of being a proud father, which, as an undead skeleton creature, is currently somewhat out of reach. And he's also under no illusions that this isn't a terrible idea. It's just something he wants more than anything. The Creeping Doom is so ambitious that his schemes seem destined to failure. Even Daurgothoth himself is aware that spawning a race of descendants having powers akin to his own could well be bringing about his own eventual doom, at their hands. Still, even if he never mates, his continual growth in power is a matter of grave concern for folk all over Faerun, both draconic and human. This Dracolich will stop at nothing, and Mystra seems content to let him build himself into the greatest creature of magic in all Toril if he can achieve this aim. At the same time, his lonely search for a mate opens him up to attacks from wily foes, and if his capturing of magic grows more successful, he'll soon have no shortage of those. This obsession means he's pushing the limits of magic, which Mystra approves of. What would it even mean for an undead creature to bear children? He needs a mate, but what form would such a mate take? He's yet to determine whether he'll be able to find or create one, but if anyone is going to achieve the nigh impossible magically, it's him. His activities mostly revolve around hoarding lore that might have value to his grand project. In one of the books of the Lady Penitent trilogy, we briefly see Daurgothoth make a deal with Dairn, a drow Justicar of Selvatarm. In exchange for shelter and magical materiel to support his plan to destroy the Iliastrayans once and for all, Dairn was to furnish the Dracolich with the secret rituals used to create the Chitines. Chitines were an artificial species of four-armed, vaguely spider-like humanoids created by wizards of House Melil of Ched-Nasad in semi-recent times as a perfect slave race, before they eventually rebelled, escaped, and became their own thing out in the Underdark, free of drow control. Before the drow were cast into the Underdark, they were the Illithiri, the earliest elven civilization on Toril. Creating and recombining life was an Illithiri speciality, so it's not out of question that tiny scraps of that lore might have made it into contemporary drow wizardry. And that's the sort of thing that might interest Daurgothoth, who is also attempting to create life. As I mentioned earlier, Daurgothoth escaped the Spell Plague and basically sat out the whole of 4th edition. Come 5th edition, he doesn't make an appearance in any published sources, but Ed Greenwood assures us he's so back. Any news on Daurgothoth? Certainly, but known only to the Chosen, Mystra and Azuth, me, and now you, not the wider realms. The Creeping Doom's tireless explorations of all manner of magic enabled him to easily survive the Spell Plague intact by using magic Knot of the Weave to take himself into an extra-dimensional pocket of his creation, and riding out the chaos. As a Dracolich, he doesn't need to eat or breathe, and patience he already had in spades. When things had settled down, he returned to Dolblund and set about rebuilding his plaything, the Cult of the Dragon. He still intends to use the cult to destroy the Zentarum, the Red Wizards, the Arcane Brotherhood, and every other group along his way to becoming the most powerful creature on Toril, and to found his race of living Dracoliches, who, of course, will all serve him. However, right now he's busy manipulating merchants and adventurers into working with or furthering the aims of the Cult of the Dragon, and recruiting and covertly testing the loyalty of new cult agents all across Faerun. Even though he doesn't appear in person, Daurgothoth casts a faint shadow over the D&D movie Honor Among Thieves as well. The heroes visit Dolblund, or rather the hanging city of Dolblund, which seems to be slightly southwest of Dolblund itself. They find a dragon there, but it's not Daurgothoth, it's Themberchaud. And the main MacGuffin of the movie is the Horn of Beckoning Death, which the villain Safina uses in an attempt to slay the entire population of Neverwinter and raise them as undead. The Forgotten Realms wiki notes that there are some curious connections between this plot and Daurgothoth. Coincidence? The Honor Among Thieves movie and novelization never say what the Red Horn is, nor what it does apart from being used in the spell Beckoning Death described by Zank. The official stats in the Legendary Magic Items article on D&D Beyond say little more, except to name and describe it in terms of itself. However, it seems similar in concept to the Grail of Shar Graylar, which is a drinking horn made from the horn of a Dracolich. It also shares a name with the Year of Beckoning Death, 1253 DR, which is when the Dracolich Daurgothoth, the Creeping Doom, and the leading candidate for greatest evil in the realms, moved into the ruins of Dolblund, a place depicted in the movie, but from which he is conspicuously absent. Daurgothoth is best used in a campaign sparingly and at a distance. You should avoid your PCs ending up on a collision course with him, because to present him as a boss battle that any party could conceivably overcome is to do a disservice to his might. There will always be a bigger fish. Daurgothoth is one of the biggest fish. As a Dracolich, he's an incredibly cautious foe. You'll never catch him with his pants down. Daurgothoth is a brilliant crafter of magic, an eternally inquisitive being, and a practiced observer with an impressive memory. He's governed by a wary paranoia that keeps him always on the lookout for lurking foes and possible attacks, and that makes him work constantly to better his personal powers and defenses. This is one worm who will never be found with most or all of his spells exhausted. If he ever reaches such a state in the heat of a protracted battle, he swiftly departs to hide away until his magic is again strong. He is patient in his dealings and calm in battle. None can successfully goad him, and pride never leads him into overconfidence in battle or any stubborn refusal to retreat. For an immortal Dracolich who takes care to safeguard himself from destruction, there will always be another day for fighting, or for seeking revenge. But a straight-up slugfest is not where Daurgothoth shines as an addition to a campaign. Consider not making him your main villain. Make him a mysterious presence working only through a shifting labyrinth of cutouts and illusions. The enigmatic man by the campfire on a dark and stormy night. The shadowy organized crime syndicate rumored to be led by the enigmatic Creeping Doom. An underworld figure no one has ever seen in person. The mysterious benefactor extending a generous offer your PCs can't refuse. His goals are fairly esoteric. He seeks occult lore so he can build towards a big evil plan someday. But today probably isn't that day. If you saw the second season of Arcane, think LeBlanc, whose true identity isn't even confirmed in the show itself, and whose goals only really make sense outside of the context the viewer is given. Cough, Mordekaiser, cough. Daurgothoth easily takes the narrative role of an evil deity. You'd rarely expect that if Shar is involved in your campaign, it's going to end with you slaying her. But he needn't even be antagonistic. Think about how Cyric crops up in Baldur's Gate 2, Throne of Baal, to ask the Baal spawn politely to maybe consider giving him the power. Daurgothoth should intrigue and terrify in equal measure. Thanks for watching. You'll be seeing the names of my patrons and YouTube members here on the screen right about now, and if you've made it this far without hitting the subscribe button, why not hit the subscribe button? What could it hurt? More D&D lore coming at you. See you on the next one.